Hi, I'm Dixie and I make costumes, mostly of the historical variety, but as you will see, some other fun things as well. Recently I asked viewers to ask me questions and I thought this would also be a good excuse to revisit my costume catalog. But first, some ground rules. I'm not doing my hair because I don't have time for that. And two, I am counting underwear as a costume because I have spent as much time on corsets and petticoats as I have on dresses, and I want to show it off. So let's get to it. Cathy asks, how do you choose what larger project to work on? Bigger projects are usually determined by whether or not I have a deadline or if I can easily acquire the necessary materials within my budget. I try not to keep a very long list of projects that I want to work on. Try is the key word there. That way my long-term schedule is more open for big projects as they pop up, like the project that I am currently working on is for a costume collaboration that has a deadline. So I was able to just drop everything and work on that immediately. This outfit was made under a super tight deadline of about 3 weeks. I had to make a petticoat, a bustle, an underskirt, an overskirt, a bodice, and a bonnet, all in about 3 weeks. And a fun fact, this collar closes with a hook and eye, but when I originally made it, it gaped as I was wearing it, and I did not like that look. So I actually hand sewed it closed on the day of the event while I was wearing it. BookCat18 asks, best way to push through sewing hesitancy? Buy really cheap fabric like thrifted bed sheets and make lots and lots of mock-ups. Take your time to get it right. Even though mock-ups can feel really tedious, I went through several mock-ups for the bodice of this ball gown, and it was annoying, but I'm glad I did it. Nothing is better than just doing it over and over and over again. Heather asks, can you list some tips for buying quality fabric online? The best thing you can do is understand terminology and fabric weight and what types of fabric are most suitable for the garment that you're making. So like a linen under 3 ounces is going to be better for things like caps and fichus, and a 5 to 7 ounce linen will be better for petticoats. The more detail a website gives about fabric content, weave, opacity, weight, the safer a buy it is. If you can spend some money on samples, do that, even if you don't intend to buy yardage, because it'll help you learn the feel and the differences between the fabric types and names and terms so that you know what to search for in the future. Discount fabric websites can have some really great stuff, but they can also have some really poor quality fabric and it's hard to tell just online. But if you want to play it safe, a store that specializes in historical fabrics like Burnley and Trowbridge or the Historical Fabric Store, they will often be more expensive, but you know the quality is going to be top-notch. This is my Marjorie Tyrell costume from Game of Thrones, which I only ever finished after her character was killed off. Sorry, spoilers. And like most of my old costumes, it's a little tight. This skirt fabric is from fabrichwholesaledirect.com. It's the same fabric that's on my chemise dress. It's super cheap, it's like $3 a yard, but you get what you pay for. It is thin and transparent, but it's also kind of scratchy and it tends to stick to itself and it tends to attract all kinds of dust and loose threads. Lori asks, do you have any tips for starting a historical sewing channel? Your camera doesn't matter nearly as much as lighting. A great camera looks terrible in the dark. Seriously, this is the lighting setup I have going on in this room. Do a practice video first that you never intend to publish. It doesn't even need to be about sewing. It's just to learn the ins and outs of your gear and editing software. I actually made a practice video a long time ago making this Spencer jacket, and I realized, 1, trying to film matte black is hard, and 2, I didn't have nearly enough light. Also, never show your bare feet on camera. Julie asks, what era would you like to try but haven't gotten to yet? I have a mild obsession with early 1910s evening gowns and the slim skirts and the layers of textures and fabrics. They're like fantasy history gowns, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I have some fabric in my stash that I want to incorporate into a project, and I have made this 19 teens corset, which I also made a video for that, but I still need to make all the other undergarments like petticoats and pair of combinations. Justina asks, what is your #1 tip for sewing moms? I've got a 10-month-old and I'm kind of struggling to manage everything. You can't do everything. You need to actively choose to let some things go. For me, that is cleaning. And I've just accepted that for the next few years, my house is not going to be as tidy as I would like. And half my garden is overgrown because half is all I can manage to take care of. On the other hand, I have time to take my toddler to the park and I can sew, so that's more important to me right now. This was the first costume that I made after having a kid, and she was still young, so she took 2 naps a day, and that was great. But now she only takes 1 nap, and she's going to go to preschool in the fall, so I'm hoping that will give me a little bit more time during the week to get everything done. Juliane asks, any tips on sewing on tight time schedules? I'm a nanny working 64 hours a week, so when it comes to my free time, I just struggle with actually getting sewing. First of all, I hope you are being properly compensated for your work with overtime and benefits, because caregivers should be valued properly in our society. Secondly, if you are too tired to sew, have everything you need to sew set up and prepped for the next day so that you can easily just pick up your project immediately. Have your needles threaded and your thread waxed, and pre-wash your fabric if you need to. Maybe even leave your project and supplies on your bed so that if you want to lay down, you will physically have to move all of your stuff out of the way, and it may remind you that you actually do want to sew. If you find that you automatically veg out on your phone after work, you can download one of those apps that will cut off your access to the internet for a set amount of time. Then you have to do something else. Alexandra asks, are you part of a historical costuming group that does reenactment days / events, or do you sew all of this for your own pleasure and YouTube? Yes, I am part of the DFW Costumers Guild, and we do events and get-togethers. So if you are in the North Texas area, I would love for you to join us. I will leave some links in the description. One of our big events is the Georgian picnic every fall, and I wore this outfit to my first picnic. I didn't actually live here yet. I drove up from my old city, and it was a super cold day, which in fall in Texas, it's really hit or miss as to the weather. And this fabric is quite thin. And this hat, I mean, I tried my best to get a big oversized straw hat that is so often seen in portraits paired with chemise dresses like this, but this one I bought online, and it isn't real straw and it doesn't have a wired brim, so it's just way too floppy. Trying to get a good straw hat for historical costumes is hard. Also, this thing is not actually really attached. Saka0 asks, I'm lucky enough to be planning out a new sewing space, and I'd love to know, how do you store your costumes? I store them downstairs in my main clothes closet because it's a large space. Underwear and accessories are categorized in boxes, and I hang up everything else. I use my closet upstairs in this room as general storage, and if I'm working on something currently, I may hang it up in the closet upstairs. These were my first ever 18th century stays that I made, and they're not great. The shape is pretty tubular instead of conical, so they tend to stay in their box downstairs and never see the light of day. Corey asks, are you planning to make matching mom and daughter costumes? Right now, no, but I'm sure I'll make her some simple historical dresses or something at some point. Maybe we'll do a family Halloween costume someday. This is a 14th century ensemble, and I could probably just whip up a quick little like T-shaped tunic for the baby and we would be ready for the Ren Fair. Natalie asks, Do you have a favorite era? Not favorite per se, but I've made the most garments for early Regency, and I appreciate the versatility of a Regency wardrobe. You can mix and match different pieces for different looks, and the dresses are relatively easy to sew and uncomplicated to fit. This was my first Regency dress that I finished and was satisfied with. It is a cotton, but I like to pretend that it's wool. It is also a wee bit small in the sides, and I should remember that if I ever want to make this pattern again. Lotus.lol asks, do you have approach for measuring plus size bodies? I'm wondering if this one might have had a typo, but I'm going to interpret it as, do you have any tips or a special way of measuring plus size bodies? And yes. These may seem a little obvious if you've been sewing for a while, and these would probably also apply to straight size bodies as well. But number one, measure yourself standing and sitting down because flesh moves depending on position. And flex your arms while measuring biceps. The last one is important if you're sewing pants or skirts that fit close over the hips and waist, like in the natural form era or the Edwardian period. But we're often told to measure the widest part of our hips, but sometimes the widest part is actually around our thighs, so that's something to take into consideration. Or commonly we have a belly protrusion in front that sits somewhere between our waistline and our full hip, so that when we measure our hips, we often don't take that volume into account. And one way you can do that is to stand a yardstick or a piece of wood up perpendicular to the floor and hold it against your body in front. Then measure from the back of your hips around to the front of that yardstick, and that will give you a more accurate full hip measurement when you cut your pattern. If you don't take this into account, what could happen is that while your skirt technically is big enough to fit around your hips, it will want to ride up as you walk because there isn't enough room to accommodate your lower front torso. Safa asks, favorite/least favorite make and why? I don't know if I have a exact favorite because that changes all the time, but the one I've certainly gotten the most wear out of is this one. It's not historical. It is my Rey cosplay from Star Wars, and it is one of the only times I've ever ventured into prop making. And it has been my Halloween costume for going on 5 years. I've worn it to conventions and costume parties, and it is just the most recognizable costume that I have. Least favorite is probably this one. It doesn't actually fit anymore, which is why I can't wear it, but it was one of my early Regency dress attempts. And it was a complete failure, and I had to hack the pattern to pieces just to get it to look remotely Regency-like. Bella asks, what eras/projects are you most looking forward to doing? And can you do a sewing room tour? I have had fabric sitting in my stash for months intended for another Regency extant gown recreation, but this dress keeps getting pushed back because something else always comes up, like this collaboration that I'm working on, and events are starting up again soon. I already started getting undressed, just remembered. I will probably do a room tour at some point. I've just got to clean up stuff, figure out what to do with my overflowing piles of white fabric. I swear, if you do historical costuming, you just collect and collect random white fabrics. Pour la Victoire asks, what is your favorite textile to work with? Anything that is easy to sew and isn't shifty, which usually means tightly woven cottons or silk taffetas. I have been trying to finish a silk satin Regency petticoat, and I'd forgotten just how wiggly that stuff is, and I hate it. This dress is cotton, and you've seen me alter it to fit in a video from last year. And this bonnet is silk taffeta. Pani.frau asks, what have you learned from historical sewing as opposed to a modern approach? I started out sewing modern clothes, and I still make most of my regular clothing, But since sewing historical, I have gotten so much better at fitting my body and noticing fit issues that I would not have noticed before, like my sloped shoulders and my high hips and how my entire right side of my body is bigger than my left. I've also learned to pay more attention to details and finishes and just have higher standards for my work. Michelle asked several questions, so I will break them down. Number 1, background. When did you start sewing? My grandmother taught me how to hand sew, probably like a lot of people. When I was 15, I saved up $100 and bought the cheapest sewing machine I could find. By college, I had started making my own patterns for modern clothes. I also dabbled a little bit in cosplay, as you've seen, but I never got that much into it. This was the first real cosplay that I made, and it's based on a character from a video game called BioShock Infinite. And I mainly made this costume because at the time I had like the exact same haircut as the character in the game, so I didn't have to wear a wig because I hate wearing wigs. When did you get into the old stuff? So about 8 years ago, I started my first costume, but it was really slow going. I didn't start ramping up my costume production until more recently. And then obviously I've been much more productive with this channel. I made a video last year about how I got into costuming that I will link in the description, and I made this dress. It was my first costume and it languished in my UFO drawer for years. Do you history bound? No. Do you reenact? No. And what do you do with them when they're done? If there is a local event, I'll wear them there. Otherwise, they make for pretty pictures and they fill up my closet. And that's fine. You know, with my modern sewing, I felt like I could easily justify it because any money that I spent on my hobby was saving money on buying clothes, because I basically made all of my clothes. Obviously, I don't wear these kinds of clothes every day, and something like this costs a lot more money than the 2 yards it takes to make a modern dress. But I think people should be able to have hobbies that bring them joy without any other kind of practical justification. I don't think that your hobby needs to be a hustle that can pay for itself. And so what if we're just making weird fancy clothes that we wear once? I have gotten so much non-tangible value out of this hobby, just learning more about myself and about history, and if it wasn't worth it for me in that way, I'd have stopped doing this a long time ago. This was one of my first kind of experimental costumes. I made all of this with online tutorials. There are certainly things that I am proud of. It was the first time I ever hand sewed eyelets. I never actually finished this outfit. I planned on making like extra sleeves and a partlet and a headpiece or something like that. But I learned so much, so I don't regret making it. Thank you for watching. I am still in the midst of a very busy summer full of travel and sewing. I will be back next month with a new big project video, and I will also be participating in the costume symposium in August. Until next time, happy sewing!